But before I introduce Jeramey, many people helped coordinate this event, which is co-sponsored by the English Department and the John B. Roach Honors College. I want to thank Dr. Peggy Watson and Lauren Nixon from the Honors College, Dr. Brad Lucas, Chair of the English Department, and the Creative Writing Committee, Alex Lemon, Kurt Rohde, Matt Pitt, and Chantel Langlanai, as well as Karen Steele for all their work coordinating today's events. I especially want to thank Lynn Herrera for the amount of time she spent promoting and coordinating the Q&A lunch today, which was fabulous, with students as well as tonight's event. Jeramey Kraatz is a TCU alumnus from just a few years ago that we are thrilled to claim as our own, having been an honors student who majored in English and advertising. Before Jeramey even graduated, he had accomplished a great deal, garnering 6 creative writing awards, publishing his work in nearly every undergraduate publication possible, and winning the 2008 Bowler Award for Outstanding Senior Honors Presentation, whose honors thesis was a collection of essays. In a recommendation letter I wrote for him in 2007, I said, "I've had countless students come to my office door over the years announcing that they want to be a writer. Jeramey didn't do that. His prose said it for him, and I truly believe he has a terrific writing career ahead of him. In less than 5 years, he has proven me right," which I always find delightful to be proven. After graduating in 2008, Jeramey moved to New York City to study in the prestigious MFA program at Columbia University, specializing in creative nonfiction. In 2012, he graduated with his degree and a draft of a collection of nonfiction he's honing for publication. He's published his essays in Salon, McSweeney's, Gizmodo, and elsewhere, so you can Google him and find, I think, all of these online, right? On a smaller scale, we used one of his essays in 8 sections of first-year composition a few years ago, and it proved to be one of the most teachable essays that we've assigned to students. He actually came to my section and did a Q&A, and students really enjoyed it. In addition to writing, he has, to quote his bio, worked as a snow cone maker, barista, retail mannequin dresser, and an intern at Marvel Comics. Right now, he works in the animation industry. Currently, though, what brings him here this evening is the Cloak Society, the first book in a middle grade series about a boy born into a family of supervillains. Of the book, Kirkus Reviews says, "Along with outfitting both super factions with appropriately cool powers, names, costumes, and layers, Kraatz slips in further cultural enrichment with sly references to game theory, Shakespeare, and true crimes." Publishers Weekly says, "Readers should find it easy to dig into the rapid-fire comic book style action." So it's got something for everyone. So we're going to have the reading with Jeramey, and then he's generously agreed to answer some questions. We'll have a little Q&A afterwards, and as you can see, the Cloak Society is for sale just right outside here. It's a great holiday gift for the upcoming holidays. And then Jeramey's going to do a book signing right here as well. So please welcome Jeramey Kraatz.
Thank you. This is great. I feel like I don't have to talk about myself anymore. You did a lot. Hi. I want to thank, first of all, the English Department and the Honors Department for, or the Honors Program for allowing me to be here today. Being a guest speaker on campus and not a student or someone out in the audience is kind of one of the more surreal instances in the already very strange world of being published. And I'm super excited to be up here tonight. I'd also like to thank friends and family who are here, my former professors, faculty, and especially those of you who have no idea who I am or why you're here. I'll try to keep it interesting. So before I read a little bit from the book, I wanted to talk a little bit about myself and how I got to where I am today and how TCU factored into all of that. So I'm from West Texas. I grew up in Odessa. If you know Friday Night Lights, book for the movie, I went to Permian High School, go Panthers. And so when I was growing up, I never really wanted to be an author. I always liked words. I always knew that I wanted to be a storyteller, which kind of just meant that I lied a lot when I was a kid. But I always was interested in how stories came to be. I remember being a kid, and before I could even read, and I had a toy box full of Swamp Thing comic books, and I would take all those Swamp Thing comic books out and lay them out in front of me, and open up to random panels and make up stories based on the random art that was on each page. And then later, whenever I was old enough to read, I still read comic books all the time. I fell really hard into comic books. I may be dating myself, but there used to be a really great X-Men comic, or X-Men cartoon that was on the air when I was a kid, and I was obsessed with it. And comic books were great for me because I would read them, and they only come out on Wednesdays, so after I was done reading comics on a Wednesday, I would want to read something else because there was a void in my life and I needed to read as much as possible, and that led me to reading longer books and more complicated books, and it really turned me into the reader that I am today. So I'm very thankful for comics. I still collect comics now. I'm the dude who still has comics by the box full in my mom's attic. She's here tonight, and she will attest to that. Anyway, so fast forward a little bit to TCU. I started here as an advertising major because, like I said, I knew that I wanted to do something telling stories, and I didn't really have the courage or the wherewithal in me to graduate and say, oh, well, I'm going to be an author after I graduate. And it seems like a terrifying thing to say now. So I was in the advertising program studying copywriting, and with the goal being I would grow up and be a copywriter. I'd work my way up to creative director, and that way I get to tell all the stories and lie all I wanted to in the name of selling products. And so my first 2 years at TCU, I really dove into the journalism department. It was a great program. I loved it so much. I had great faculty, great experience, but there was just something that was missing in it for me. And looking back on it now, I can tell you exactly what it was. Because in my spare time, what I was doing was I was writing all these short stories about my life and all these short stories about the people that I was meeting in the dorms. And I was a poor college student. I was a freshman and a sophomore, and I didn't have a job. And I met all of these new people, and all these new birthdays were coming up, and I couldn't afford to give birthday presents for everyone. So instead, I'd write stories about how my hamsters ran away when I was 7 years old, or how I ran away to Dairy Queen when I was a kid one time, and I'd give them in lieu of actual presents to my friends. And I had so much fun doing it. And then at the end of the school year, I would write these like short satires of Greek myths, and I would put all my friends in them, and the villains would all be the creepy people that we met in the dorms. And I was having so much fun writing these things, but it never felt like something that I was doing for work or anything like that. It was something I was doing completely outside of the classroom for fun. Looking back on it now, it's very obvious that that's what I wanted to be doing. But at the time, it was just something that I was doing to pass the time. And then it was the end of my sophomore year or the beginning of my junior year that I randomly took a class called the Essay that was taught by Dr. Hogue. I'm not actually sure why I took the class, because it was a lot of work and I wasn't an English student. I think it's because I had a lot of friends who were taking the class at the time. But it introduced me to a type of writing, creative nonfiction, or the personal essay, whatever you want to call it, that I had never been exposed to before, had never read really in depth or analyzed before. And so I fell hard for it, and I loved it, because it was the type of things that I like to do. It was telling stories about me, and getting to write about like why I loved comic books, or why I hate Dakota Fanning, or you could pick anything, you could write anything, and I had so much fun doing it. And I had such a great response, not only from my workshop peers, but also from Dr. Hogue. And I remember going to her office. You may not remember this. For my midterm portfolio review. And there are two moments from that that I remember very specifically. The first was she read a passage to me, and she looked me straight in the eye, deadpan, and said, "Is that supposed to be funny?" And I think I kind of withered and said, "Yes, it was. I'll cut it. I'll change it. I'll fix it, I promise." And then later, at the end of the meeting, we were talking about what I wanted to do with my life and my career and what I was studying. And she looked at me and she said, "You could be a capital W writer," was the phrasing she used. And that meant so much to me. And it was one of those instances where it was like when you're hungry and you don't know what you want to eat, and then someone mentions steak, and then all you can think about is eating steak. And that's what that moment was like for me. Once she kind of said, "You could be a writer, and it's okay to be a writer," it switched something in my brain. And so I ended up adding English as my second major at TCU. I did my senior honors project. It was a thesis of creative essays. And I spent my last 2 years here really focusing on writing and trying to figure out what I could do with writing as a life. And I had a lot of very small victories. I won, as Dr. mentioned, a whole lot of creative writing awards and ad writing awards. At the time, it was like, woo, free money, I'm going to buy a Wii. But looking back on it now, I did buy a Wii with that money. Looking back on it now, like all of these things were very small instances of me being pushed toward writing, and then people making it okay for me to be a writer. And people saying, yes, like this is something that you're good at, this is something you can do. And I'm so thankful that TCU gave me that opportunity. And I had a series of such wonderful professors here. Richard Enos, Dr. Vanderwerken, and Bonnie Blackwell, and all the people who I'm blanking on right now, who were all so supportive of the work that I was doing. but I was still very concerned about graduating and calling myself a writer. So what I did was I was looking into MFA programs, which is Master of Fine Arts in Writing, and I kind of made a deal with myself that if I got into one of these programs, I would go, and I'd try to make a go of it. And if not, I would try to go the advertising route, and I would just get a job as a copywriter. This shows how disillusioned I was with the economy at the time. I'll just be a copywriter, no big deal. I ended up getting into a couple of programs. I went to Columbia, where I studied nonfiction for 2 years. The question you may have is how I went from studying nonfiction at Columbia for 2 years to writing a children's book about superpowers. But it makes perfect sense. I'll tell you why. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge comic book nerd. I've been collecting comics since I was 7 years old. And as I was at Columbia, I was doing a lot of research about comic books and looking at masculinity and gender constructs in comics and sexuality and all those kind of things that grad students like to talk about. And at the same time, I ended up getting an internship in the editorial department for the X-Men group at Marvel, which is like my geeky dream come true. And I remember really, right before I started my internship in my last semester of classes at Columbia, wanting to have like a pitch ready just in case I ever got to pitch a comic book while I was at Marvel. And I had been out working all day with one of my fellow classmates from Columbia, very research-heavy essays, and we were both very exhausted and tired at the end of the day, and we ordered a bunch of Chinese food in and opened a bottle of wine, and the book Pride and Prejudice and Zombies had just come out. And we all kind of laughed at it, and then we all read it, and then it was like a big bestseller. So we were talking about it, and we were like, what kind of literary mashups should we be writing? And we were like, what if we wrote Sleeping Beauty that took place in like the Wild Wild West? And what if we wrote King Lear, but instead of taking place when it took place in like the Civil War or something like that? Like how can we mash stuff together and make something interesting? So I proposed that what if we took Romeo and Juliet, instead of having like the Montagues and the Capulets, you had like the Masters of Evil and the Avengers, and you had supervillains versus superheroes, and instead of the nurse, you had a robot, and instead of the friar, you had like a plucky journalist or something like that. And we laughed about it and we moved on, but that was the kernel that like really stuck with me, and I started thinking, well, how would a book like that work? And because someone in that is a supervillain, and how do you make that supervillain sympathetic? And what is that supervillain's family life like and stuff like that? And that kind of grew in the back of my head to the point where it's the only project that I wanted to be working on. And it was what I was working on when I was supposed to be working on my thesis. So when I was done with classes at Columbia, I ended up moving back to Texas, and instead of doing my thesis, I sat and wrote the Cloak Society over the course of a year. And that's how we ended up here tonight. So thank you, TCU, for pushing me along the way.